The primary focus of this lesson will be on the extruded intercept spacer as it exits the extruder. Here, we will inspect the application of the sealant and matrix materials.
In addition to checking the spacer quality, it is also important that we verify the sealant and matrix application on the spacer. By design of the side nozzle tips, the bead height of the side seals should be 50 to 55 thousandths, and the profile should fill the nozzle channel width, as shown in Figure 1. The thin layer of material above and below the bead is excess that is overflowing the channel and pushing in between the spacer and nozzle tip. This excess is desirable as it helps achieve the proper wet out in the finished IG. A narrow bead like this will not provide adequate wet out and will require adjustment by a qualified maintenance technician. Trying to apply too much material requires that the heads be further away from the spacer, which can cause bonding issues. It is in fact the wet out that determines the application amount on the extruder. In a finished IG unit, the sealant wet out path should be a minimum of 3/16 wide on the bearing surface, not including the sealant on the back of the spacer. Typically, a wet out of 1/4 inch or more is desired. The wider the wet out, the better moisture barrier and argon retention. The thickness of the sealant between the glass and the spacer should be 15 to 25 thousandths. If these values are not achieved, or if the material has been pushed up into the sightline past the top lip of the spacer, then the application of sealant should be adjusted on the extruder. Measuring the sealant can be tricky as the material is hot and pliable. Set up the Intercept and Extruder as instructed in the operations video series for your model machines. Run a small batch of 12 1/4 inch by 12 1/4 inch spacers and let a few go through the extruder, keeping the last one and letting the sealant cool slightly. The extra 1/4 inch added to the width and height accounts for the undercut dimension, which is the typical difference between the spacer frame size and the glass size. Holding the calipers as shown here, with your finger on the depth probe, slide the probe to the top of the bead and with slight pressure on the probe, slide the end of the calipers down to the bead while holding the calipers square to the spacer in all directions. Do not look at the display, but rather at the light between the bead and the end of the calipers. When there is no light visible, then look at the display for your measurement. Do not move the calipers until you've read the display. Repeat this several times, staying a few inches from the corners or muntin punches, and measuring on the same side of the spacer. Your readings should be consistent. If not, keep practicing this technique. Check the bead height on the opposite side. They should be similar. The side sealant beads typically measure around 50 to 60 thousandths, but most importantly, should be adequate for proper wet out when the IG unit is heated and pressed. Using the same technique as the sides, press the probe in the middle of the bottom sealant and wiggle it around until the probe is against the bottom of the spacer. The bottom sealant should measure between 30 and 50 thousandths. Ideally, 40 to 45 thousandths is desired. Too much sealant on the bottom will make spacer handling more difficult, leaving fingerprints and sealant sticking to the conveyor belt. Bottom sealant is applied to protect the spacer and improve thermal efficiency. The desiccated matrix is typically measured by weight, but may also be measured by thickness. To measure by weight, run a small batch of 12 1/4 inch by 12 1/4 inch spacers. Press the Verify Matrix Weight button on the extruder and choose Yes to run one spacer with no sealant or matrix. Then press the Verify Matrix Weight button again and select No to run one spacer with no sealant. Separate the spacer at the corners to remove the third section of each spacer. use the section of bare spacer to tare the scale, then weigh the section with the matrix applied. Verify that it meets your matrix supplier's recommendations.
Thank you for participating in this lesson on Extruded Intercept Spacer quality checks. When you have completed the 3 lessons in this Finish Spacer Quality Check section, please continue the course on Intercept Spacer folding techniques.